What happens when the system designed to protect us turns on itself? It starts on a rainy Tuesday night in Baltimore. Two decorated police officers full of swagger and confidence pull over a black man in a beat-up sedan for a minor traffic violation. They laugh at him, mock his calm demeanor, and drag him through the mud of the justice system, seeing him as just another statistic. They have no idea they are not cuffing a common criminal. They are arresting their worst nightmare, a man with a secret so powerful it's about to bring their world and the entire corrupt system they represent crashing down in spectacular fashion. Stay tuned, because this story of karma is one you won't forget. The rain in Baltimore fell in relentless, slanting sheets, turning the asphalt of Franklin Street into a slick black mirror reflecting the hazy glow of streetlights. It was the kind of night that soaked deep into your bones, a miserable Tuesday in late October. Inside, a weathered 1999 Toyota Camry. Marcus Thorne drove with a quiet focus, the rhythmic slap of the worn-out windshield wipers counting a steady beat. He wore a simple grey hoodie, faded jeans, and a pair of scuffed work boots, the kind of anonymous attire that allowed a man to blend in to become part of the city's scenery. That was precisely the point. In the rearview mirror, flashing blue and red lights suddenly tore through the watery gloom. Marcus's hands, resting calmly on the steering wheel, did not tighten. His heart rate remained as steady as the wipers. He had been expecting this. Not tonight necessarily, not this specific patrol car, but he knew it was inevitable. It was the reason he was here, driving this particular car in this particular neighborhood. He signaled, pulled the Camry smoothly to the curb, and killed the engine. The world outside was a cacophony of rain and the approaching heavy footsteps. A sharp metallic rap on the driver's side window. Marcus lowered it, and a blast of cold, damp air filled the car. A young officer, his face glistening with rain under the brim of his cap, leaned down. His name tag read Miller. He was maybe 25, with the kind of cocksure arrogance that came from wearing a badge and a gun before having seen enough of the world to understand their weight. License and Registration Officer Kevin Miller barked, his voice sharp and impatient. He shined a high-lumen flashlight directly into Marcus's eyes, a classic intimidation tactic. Marcus blinked against the glare but didn't flinch. He reached slowly, deliberately for the glove compartment. "Evening, officer. What seems to be the problem?" His voice was calm, measured a deep baritone that held a natural authority, though his appearance suggested none. "You've got a busted tail light," Miller snapped, "and you rolled through that last stop sign. Let's see the paperwork." Now, Marcus knew for a fact the tail light was functional. He had checked it himself less than an hour ago. The stop sign was a lie. He had come to a complete 3-second stop. This was a pretext, a fishing expedition. He handed over a valid driver's license under the name Mark Thompson and the car's registration. Miller snatched the documents and examined them with a sneer. He glanced from the photo back to Marcus's face. "Mark Thompson, huh? You live around here." "Just passing through," Marcus replied evenly. Miller's partner, Sergeant Frank Davis, a stout man in his late 40s with a perpetually sour expression and a thick moustache, ambled over to the passenger side. He cupped his hands and peered in his eyes, scanning the empty seats and floorboards. Davis had been on the force for 2 decades. The idealism had been sandblasted out of him long ago, replaced by a weary cynicism that viewed everyone in a hoodie as a potential suspect. "What are you doing in this part of town?" Mark Miller continued, his tone dripping with accusation. "Not a lot of tourist spots on this block. Visiting a friend," Marcus said, keeping his answers simple and direct. Miller chuckled a humorless, ugly sound. He looked back at Davis, who just shrugged. "A friend?" Miller mocked. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "You got anything in the car I should know about? Any weapons, drugs? Anything that's going to make this a bad night for you? I have nothing illegal in my possession or in my vehicle, officer." The quiet dignity in Marcus's voice seemed to irritate Miller more than any protest would have. It was a challenge to his authority. Miller wanted fear. He wanted stammering, pleading, or anger. He was getting none of it. "You know what, I think you're lying to me," Mark Miller said, puffing out his chest. "I'm getting a real suspicious vibe from you. Step out of the car. We're going to have a look around. Officer, with all due respect, you have no probable cause to search my vehicle." Marcus stated his tone, remaining respectful, but firm. He knew his rights intimately. This was the final straw for Miller. The mention of probable cause from a man who looked like Marcus was in his eyes an act of defiance. "Oh, we got a lawyer now, do we?" Miller sneered. He yanked the car door open. "I said, get out of the car, now or I'll drag you out." Marcus Thorne took a slow breath, his mind a silent recorder, cataloguing every word, every action, every violation of protocol. He was not Mark Thompson, a random citizen. He was Director Marcus Thorne, the newly and quietly confirmed head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And he was in Baltimore running the most important and most secret operation of his career, a self-initiated audit of the American justice system from the ground up. He was the bait, and Officer Miller had just taken it. He slowly swung his legs out of the car and stood up, his 6'2" frame unfolding into the miserable wet night. He kept his hands visible away from his body. "Put your hands on the hood," Miller commanded, shoving him forward. Marcus complied, the cold, wet metal of the Camry shocking against his palms. He could feel Miller's aggressive pat-down far rougher than necessary. Davis watched impassive from the sidewalk. "What's this?" Miller said, his hand stopping on a small, hard object in Marcus's right jeans pocket. He pulled it out. It was a simple, inexpensive, disposable cell phone, a burner. "A little paranoid, are we, Mark? Got a reason to hide your calls." Before Marcus could answer, Miller's hand went to his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped through it, finding only the Mark Thompson ID and a few $20 bills. No credit cards, nothing to suggest a life beyond this persona. Clean Davis grunted from the side. "Let's just write the ticket and go, Kev. It's pouring." But Miller wasn't satisfied. He felt disrespected. He needed to assert his dominance. "I don't like his attitude," Miller said, loud enough for Marcus to hear clearly. "He's hiding something. I can feel it." He turned back to Marcus. "You were being evasive. That's obstructing. And when I told you to get out of the car, you hesitated. That's resisting." Marcus remained silent, to his face a mask of placid control. This was the moment the script flipped, the moment a simple illegal stop became something far more serious. "You know what," Miller said with a sudden vicious grin. "You're under arrest." For what, Marcus asked, his voice still impossibly calm. For resisting arrest and obstruction of justice, Miller declared, pulling out his handcuffs. He wrenched Marcus's arms behind his back, ratcheting the steel cuffs on so tightly they bit into the flesh of his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Officer Kevin Miller recited the Miranda rights he so clearly disdained, Sergeant Davis sighed and walked back to the patrol car to run the fake name. He didn't care. To him, this was just another Tuesday, another nameless face processed through the grinder. But for Marcus Thorne, this was the beginning. He wasn't just being arrested. He was gathering evidence. And for Miller and Davis, their world had just tilted on its axis. They were laughing now, but they had just arrested the single most powerful law enforcement officer in the United States of America. The reckoning was coming, and like the storm overhead, it would be torrential. The interior of the patrol car smelled of stale coffee, cheap air freshener, and the faint metallic scent of dried blood. It was the smell of impersonal misery. Marcus sat in the back, the cage's wire mesh pressing against his shoulder as the car rumbled through the rain-swept streets. Miller was driving, glancing at him in the rearview mirror with a smug, triumphant look. Davis sat in the passenger seat, silently filling out preliminary paperwork on a laptop mounted to the dash. So, Mark Thompson. Miller began, his voice dripping with condescension. You're awfully quiet back there for a guy whose night just went down the toilet. Most guys, they're either crying or threatening us by now. Which one is it going to be for you? Marcus simply looked back at him in the mirror, his expression unreadable. His silence was his shield and his weapon. Every unprovoked taunt, every procedural shortcut was a nail in the coffin they were building for themselves. Ah, the silent type. I get it. Miller scoffed. Think you're tough? We'll see how tough you are down at the precinct. Sarge, this guy thinks he's Denzel in Training Day. Sergeant Davis grunted without looking up from his screen. Just finish the report, Kev. I want to get some dry socks on before the shift ends. The precinct was a squat, brutalist brick building that seemed to absorb the misery of everyone who entered it. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and desperation. Fluorescent lights hummed with a sickly yellow-white buzz, casting long, distorted shadows. Miller shoved Marcus toward the booking desk, where a portly, bored-looking sergeant named O'Malley barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle. Got a live one for you, Mike Miller announced proudly. Resisting and obstruction. Name's Mark Thompson. O'Malley sighed, the sound of a man who had seen this exact scene play out 10,000 times. Empty your pockets into the bin. Take off your belt and shoelaces. Marcus complied methodically, placing the burner phone, his wallet, and a set of keys to a place he didn't live into a grimy plastic tray. As he unlaced his boots, Miller leaned against the counter, chatting with another officer who had just walked in. You won't believe this guy Rick Miller said, gesturing with his thumb at Marcus. Pulls him over for a busted tail light, and he starts quoting the law at me. Probable cause, he says. Miller and Rick burst into laughter. The sound was loud and sharp in the sterile booking area, like he just finished watching a Law and Order marathon. So I taught him a new legal term, contempt of cop. More laughter. Marcus continued his task, his face impassive, but his mind was a whirlwind of activity. He was no longer just an observer. He was a case study. He was feeling the system from the inside, the casual cruelty, the dismissal of basic rights, the culture of mockery that thrived in the absence of accountability. After being fingerprinted and photographed, a process he endured with the same unnerving calm, he was led to a holding cell. The heavy steel door clanged shut with a deafening finality. The cell was cold, damp, and smelled faintly of urine and vomit. A concrete slab with a thin, stained mattress served as a bed. A stainless steel toilet and sink were bolted to the opposite wall. He sat on the edge of the slab, the cold seeping through his jeans. He could hear the cops outside, their voices echoing in the corridor. Miller was clearly telling the story of the arrest, again embellishing it, painting Marcus as an aggressive, mouthy thug who got what he deserved. The laughter that followed was a recurring theme of the night. And then I told him, "Your right to remain silent is the best advice you're going to get all night, buddy." Miller's voice boomed, followed by another round of guffaws. Marcus closed his eyes. He wasn't angry. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. What he felt was a cold, clarifying resolve. He had initiated Operation Clean Slate, because of statistics and whistleblower reports that painted a grim picture of systemic rot in local law enforcement jurisdictions across the country. He had read sterile reports about biased policing, fabricated charges, and civil rights violations. But reading a report was different from living it. It was the difference between looking at a map of a storm and being caught in the hurricane. He was feeling the chilling effect of a badge used as a shield for prejudice. He was experiencing the dehumanization that erodes a person's faith in the very idea of justice. These officers, Miller and Davis, weren't just two bad apples. They were symptoms of a diseased orchard, thriving in a culture that encouraged or at least tolerated their behavior. Hours passed. The precinct quieted as the night wore on. The adrenaline of the arrest faded, for the officers replaced by the mundane rhythm of paperwork and coffee breaks. For Marcus, the time was not idle. He mentally replayed every moment of the encounter, from the first flash of lights to the clang of the cell door. He analyzed the protocol breaches, the unconstitutional search, the fabricated charges. He was building the federal case in his head piece by meticulous piece. Around 4 a.m., a young, sleep-deprived public defender was led to his cell. Her name was Sarah Jenkins. She looked no older than 26. Her suit was slightly rumpled, and she clutched a stack of files that seemed to weigh more than she did. She had the harried, overwhelmed look of someone fighting a tidal wave with a bucket. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice soft but tired. "I'm Sarah Jenkins. The court appointed me to represent you. Can you tell me what happened tonight?" Marcus looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the flicker of idealism in her eyes, struggling against the exhaustion of a broken system. She was exactly the kind of person he hoped still existed within these walls. He sat up straight. "Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice holding no trace of fear or despair. "Yes. Let me tell you exactly what happened." He recounted the events of the night, not as a panicked victim, but as a precise, factual witness. He detailed the non-existent traffic violations, the illegal order to exit the vehicle, the unconstitutional search, and the retaliatory charges. He spoke with such clarity and intelligence that Sarah Jenkins found herself leaning forward, her pen flying across her legal pad. She had heard hundreds of these stories, but this one was different. There was no embellishment, no emotional plea, just the cold, hard facts, delivered by a man who seemed more like a law professor than a common criminal. "They laughed at you," she murmured, looking up from her notes. "The arresting officer, Miller, he was bragging about it at the desk." "Yes," Marcus confirmed. He seemed to find the situation quite amusing. Sarah shook her head, a familiar sense of outrage mixing with her professional weariness. "Okay, Mr. Thompson, the charges are ridiculous. Obstruction and resisting are catch-alls they use when they have nothing else. The DA will probably offer you a plea deal, time served, and a small fine to make it all go away." Marcus looked her directly in the eyes. "Ms. Jenkins, we will not be taking a plea deal. We will be pleading not guilty. I want to take this to trial." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Going to trial was a massive gamble, especially for someone like Mark Thompson, against the word of two police officers. A jury was likely to believe the men in uniform. "A trial is risky," she advised cautiously. "It's your word against theirs. It could mean real jail time if we lose." "I'm aware of the risks," Marcus said, his voice resonating with an unshakable confidence that made the hair on her arms stand up. "But I have a feeling that when the truth of this matter is brought into the light, the jury will make the right decision." Sarah Jenkins stared at the man in the cell. There was something profound about him, a depth and a certainty she had never encountered before. She didn't know who he was or where he came from, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something more than just hope. She felt like she was on the right side of a fight that truly mattered, and she had no idea how right she was. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in institutional apathy. Marcus Thorne, still Mark Thompson, was moved from the precinct-holding cell to the Baltimore Central Booking and Intake Center. It was a descent into a deeper circle of the inferno, a massive impersonal facility where individuals were processed not as people, but as inventory. He was stripped of his clothes and given a faded orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial bleach. He was herded with dozens of other men through a series of sterile, concrete hallways subjected to medical screenings, and finally assigned to a large, overcrowded holding pen to await his bail hearing. The air was a stale mix of body odor, fear, and profound boredom. Men slept on the floor, played cards with worn-out decks, or stared blankly at the walls. Fights threatened to break out over seating arrangements or perceived slights. Marcus remained an island of calm in the churning sea of human misery. He observed, he listened, he learned. He heard stories from other inmates. Some were career criminals, but many were like him. Men swept up by overly aggressive policing for minor infractions, unable to afford bail, their lives, put on hold jobs, lost families, strained. This was the part of the system the public rarely saw. This was the consequence of policies and attitudes that prioritized arrests over justice. He wasn't just a director anymore. He was a witness bearing testimony from the belly of the beast. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins was fighting her war of attrition. She ran the name Mark Thompson through every database she had access to. The man was a ghost. He had a valid driver's license, a social security number that checked out, and no criminal record. But there was no credit history, no property ownership, no digital footprint. It was as if he'd been created yesterday. It was strange, but not unheard of for people living on the margins. She filed a motion for discovery demanding all evidence from the prosecution, specifically requesting the dashcam and bodycam footage from Officers Miller and Davis. This was standard procedure, but she was met with a frustrating delay. The Assistant District Attorney's Office sent back a form letter stating the request was being processed. At the bail hearing held via a grainy video conference, the judge barely looked up from his papers. The prosecutor, a young, ambitious ADA named Ben Carter, read the charges in a monotone voice. Resisting arrest obstruction of justice, Your Honor. The state views the defendant as uncooperative and recommends bail be set at $10,000, Sarah argued passionately. Your Honor, Mr. Thompson has no prior record and is not a flight risk. These charges are a gross overreach by the arresting officers. We ask that he be released on his own recognizance. The judge, looking bored, split the difference. Bail is set at $5,000. Next case. The entire proceeding took less than 90 seconds. Marcus, watching from the crowded video room at Central Booking, knew he could not post bail. The persona of Mark Thompson wouldn't have $500 for a bail bondsman, let alone the full amount. He was going to stay inside. He needed the full experience. Back in her cluttered office, Sarah slammed a law book down on her desk in frustration. 10% of $5,000 was $500, an impossible sum for a man who had $87 in his wallet when arrested. He was trapped. The system was designed to punish poverty, to coerce guilty pleas to escape the hell of pretrial detention. Her phone rang. It was ADA Ben Carter. Sarah, it's Ben, he said, his voice slick and confident. Listen about your guy Thompson. My boss, Alan Rourke, is taking a personal interest in this one. Sarah's blood ran cold. Alan Rourke was the district attorney for the city of Baltimore. He was a ruthless, politically ambitious man, known for his tough-on-crime stance. Why on earth would the DA himself care about a minor, trumped-up resisting arrest charge? Why, Sarah asked, her voice wary. Rourke is tired of seeing officers disrespected on the street, Carter explained, though it sounded rehearsed. He wants to send a message. We're not offering any deals on this. In fact, we've just reviewed Officer Miller's full report. We're adding a charge. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What charge? Assault on a law enforcement officer, 2nd degree. Sarah was dumbfounded. Assault on what grounds? There was nothing in the initial report about an assault. Officer Miller now recalls that, during the struggle, your client intentionally slammed his shoulder into Miller's chest, causing him pain and forcing him to use additional force to subdue the suspect, Carter recited coolly. His partner, Sergeant Davis, corroborates his account. The new charges will be filed in the morning. See you at the arraignment. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone in disbelief. This was a fabrication, a blatant, malicious lie designed to crush her client and guarantee a conviction. Miller and Davis must have realized that a simple resisting charge might not stick, especially if the stop was questionable. So they had conspired to invent a more serious crime. And DA Alan Rourke, eager to burnish his reputation as a pro-police prosecutor, was enabling them. This had escalated from a case of bad policing to a criminal conspiracy. She rushed back to the detention center, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fury. She met Marcus in a small, sterile interview room. "They're lying," she said, her voice shaking with anger as she explained the new charge. "They've added a felony assault charge. Marcus, I have to call you. Marcus, Mr. Thompson feels too formal for this. This changes everything. This is no longer a misdemeanor. This is serious prison time." She expected to see fear in his eyes, panic, despair. Instead, she saw the same unnerving, profound calm. He listened intently, his expression unchanging, as if he were a grandmaster at chess, watching his opponent make a predictable but foolish move. "I see," he said when she was finished. His voice was quiet, but it seemed to shake the very air in the small room. "They are overplaying their hand." "Overplaying their hand," Sarah exclaimed, bewildered. "They're burying you. Rourke will use this to make headlines. DA cracks down on attacks against police." "We need to do something. I can file a complaint with Internal Affairs, but that will take months and likely go nowhere." Marcus held up a hand, a simple gesture that commanded silence. "Sarah, I need you to trust me. Do not file a complaint with IAD. Do not talk to the press. Continue to demand the body cam footage. Let them build their case on this foundation of lies. Let them become convinced they are going to win." "Why?" she pleaded, utterly confused by his strategy of inaction. "You're asking me to let them perjure themselves." "Precisely," Marcus said, a glint of something cold and hard in his eyes. "The deeper the hole they dig, the further they will have to fall. Everything that is happening, every lie, every fabricated charge is a gift. DA Rourke's involvement is the most precious gift of all. He is tying his entire career to the false testimony of 2 corrupt officers." He leaned forward, and for the first time, Sarah felt the immense weight of the authority that radiated from him. "I told you I wanted to go to trial," he said, his voice a low, powerful rumble. "Now more than ever, I want them all in that courtroom. I want Miller and Davis on the stand under oath. And I want Alan Rourke sitting at the prosecution's table, smiling, believing he's about to make an example of me." Sarah Jenkins looked at the man in the orange jumpsuit. He wasn't just an innocent man anymore. He was a hunter, patiently waiting for the trap to be set. And she was beginning to understand that the trial wasn't going to be about him. It was going to be a trial of the entire system that had put him here. District Attorney Alan Rourke surveyed his corner office, a space designed to project power. The walls were adorned with framed newspaper articles, praising his conviction rates, and photos of him shaking hands with senators and police chiefs. From his window, he had a panoramic view of the city. He was in his own mind, single-handedly saving from chaos. Rourke was a man who believed in narratives. His narrative was that of the iron-fisted protector, the thin line between order and anarchy. The case of Mark Thompson had landed on his desk as a minor brief, but he saw in it the perfect raw material for his narrative. An arrogant suspect disrespecting his officers, a felony assault charge to show solidarity with the police union whose endorsement he coveted for his upcoming mayoral run. It was perfect. "Ben, what's the latest on the Thompson case?" Rourke asked his ADA, leaning back in his high-backed leather chair. "The public defender Jenkins is still demanding the dash-cam footage," Ben Carter replied. "She's filed 3 separate motions. She's like a dog with a bone." Rourke smiled a thin, predatory expression. "Of course she is. She thinks she's Erin Brockovich. Let her file. Stall. Tell her there was a glitch in the upload, that the file seems to be corrupted. Standard procedure. By the time we recover it, the trial will be over." The truth was, the footage was not corrupted. Rourke had watched it himself. It was grainy, and the audio was distorted by the rain, but it was clear enough. It showed a textbook bad stop. It showed Miller's escalating aggression and Thorne's unnerving calm. Crucially, it did not show an assault. At the moment Miller claimed he was slammed in the chest, the camera angle was obscured as he lunged toward Thorne. It was ambiguous enough. It didn't prove the assault, but it didn't disprove it either. In a courtroom, it would be the word of 2 decorated officers against a jobless nobody. Rourke knew which way any jury would lean. And the officers Rourke asked. "Are they solid rock solid?" Carter assured him. "Miller is eager to testify. Davis is a 20-year veteran. His testimony will be unimpeachable. They both have a consistent, detailed memory of the assault," Good Rourke said, steepling his fingers. "I want to personally handle the closing arguments on this one. It'll play well. We will not stand by while the brave men and women of law enforcement are used as punching bags." Write that down, Ben. That's a good line for the press release. Rourke saw this as a simple, low-risk, high-reward case. He would make an example of Mark Thompson, get his face on the evening news, and solidify his alliance with the police department. He gave no thought to the man in the orange jumpsuit, other than as a prop in his own political theater. Meanwhile, in the sterile confines of the detention center library, Sarah Jenkins sat across a metal table from Marcus Thorne. He had been incarcerated for nearly 3 weeks. The trial was fast-tracked, something Rourke had pushed for wanting a swift victory. "They're claiming the body cam footage is corrupted," Sarah said, her voice laced with frustration. "It's a lie, a transparent one. They're stonewalling because they know it doesn't show what they claim it does." "Let them," Marcus replied calmly. He had used his time inside to read mostly law books and philosophy. He looked thinner, but his eyes were sharper than ever. Their refusal to produce evidence will speak for itself later. "How is our preparation for the trial?" Sarah hesitated. "Our preparation. Marcus, we have nothing. Our entire defense is you telling your side of the story. They have 2 officers, a decorated sergeant, and the full weight of the DA's office. I've been a public defender for 3 years. I have never won a case like this." Marcus reached across the table and gently tapped her legal pad. "Your job, Ms. Jenkins, is not to win the case based on the evidence they have presented. Your job is to get Miller and Davis on that stand under oath and let them tell their lies to a judge and jury. Your job is to get D.A. Rourke to personally invest his reputation in those lies. You have already succeeded in that. But what's our move? What's our bombshell? We don't have one," she insisted, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. For the first time, Marcus's expression softened slightly. He saw her genuine fear and her fierce commitment to his case. He knew he was asking her to walk into a slaughterhouse armed with nothing but faith in him. It was time to give her something more. "There will be a development," he said, his voice low and confidential. "A significant one. On the morning of the trial, you will receive a call from a man named David Hayes. He is an assistant United States attorney. You will do exactly as he instructs. He will provide you with the bombshell, as you call it." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. An assistant U.S. attorney, the federal government. What did they have to do with a local assault case? "Who are you, Marcus?" She breathed the question that had haunted her for weeks. He gave her a small, enigmatic smile. "I am a man who believes in accountability, Miss Jenkins, and I believe that the best way to test the integrity of a system is to subject yourself to it. Now let's go over Officer Miller's likely testimony one more time. I want you to be prepared to question every single detail." The days leading up to the trial were a blur of activity. For Rourke's team, it was a celebratory march. They prepped Miller and Davis, who grew more confident with each rehearsal of their story. Miller especially began to enjoy the spotlight, seeing himself as a hero who had taken a dangerous thug off the streets. For Sarah, it was a nerve-wracking countdown. She prepared her cross-examinations as Marcus had instructed, focusing on inconsistencies in the initial police report versus the later embellished version. She clung to the name Marcus had given her, David Hayes, as a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. She had no idea what was coming, but her client's unshakable confidence was strangely contagious. On the eve of the trial, Sergeant Frank Davis sat in a dimly lit bar nursing a beer. Miller was at the other end of the bar holding court, laughing and bragging about how he was going to nail that scumbag on the stand tomorrow. Davis wasn't laughing. A knot of unease had been tightening in his gut for days. He was a veteran. He knew the difference between bending the rules and shattering them. They had shattered them. Lying about a traffic stop was one thing. Fabricating a felony assault was another level entirely. "You okay, Frank?" the bartender asked, wiping down the counter. "Just tired," Sal Davis mumbled into his glass. "Long week." He watched Miller puffed up with arrogance and self-importance. The kid was reckless. And the defendant. There was something about the man Thompson. Davis had seen his mugshot again when reviewing the case file. The eyes, calm, intelligent, and utterly without fear. In his 20 years on the force, Davis had seen every kind of criminal, panicked, violent, sociopathic, insane. But he had never seen eyes like that. They were the eyes of a man who knew something you didn't. They were the eyes of a man in complete control. He downed his beer and threw some cash on the counter. He needed to go home to get some sleep. But he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was not going to be the simple, straightforward trial everyone expected. Something was wrong. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The morning of the trial was grey and overcast the sky, threatening a rain that never came. Courtroom 4B was a grand wood-panelled chamber that felt heavy with the history of verdicts rendered and lives altered. Alan Rourke sat at the prosecution's table, looking confident and immaculate in a tailored suit. He exuded an aura of prosecutorial might. Next to him, Officers Miller and Davis sat in their dress uniforms, medals, polished, looking like paragons of civic duty. Sarah Jenkins sat at the defense table, her hands trembling slightly as she organized her notes. Her client, now in a cheap, ill-fitting suit provided by her office, sat beside her. Marcus Thorne looked as serene as he had on the night of his arrest. He scanned the courtroom, the judge, the jury, the prosecutors with the dispassionate eye of a sociologist studying a foreign tribe. The trial began as expected. Rourke's opening statement was a masterclass in rhetoric, painting a picture of brave officers under siege on the dangerous streets of Baltimore, and a defiant criminal who chose violence over compliance. Then he called his first witness, Officer Kevin Miller. Miller walked to the stand with a confident swagger. Under Rourke's gentle questioning, he recounted his version of events. He was articulate and convincing. He described the furtive movements of the suspect, the smell of deceit, and the air of aggression. When he got to the assault, his voice filled with righteous indignation. "He turned on me," Miller said, looking directly at the jury. "As I was trying to cuff him, he violently slammed his shoulder into my chest, trying to knock me off balance so he could escape. It was a clear, intentional assault. I was shocked. I had to use a pain compliance hold to subdue him. It was a compelling performance." Sarah could feel the jury's sympathy, shifting firmly toward the young, heroic officer. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she took a deep breath and remembered Marcus's instructions. She began not with the assault, but with the tail light. "Officer Miller, you stated the initial reason for the stop was a broken tail light, correct?" "Yes, that's correct." "Are you aware that Mr. Thompson's vehicle was impounded after his arrest?" "Of course, and that a standard inventory report was conducted, including a vehicle function check." Miller shifted slightly. "I suppose so." Sarah placed a document on the projector. "This is the impound lot report for the vehicle. Under vehicle condition, it lists all lights. Headlights brake, lights, tail lights as fully functional." "Can you explain that discrepancy?" Miller's confidence wavered for a second. "Well, it could have been intermittent. It was out when I saw it." She moved on to the stop sign, pointing out that his patrol car was over 100 yards away at the time, making a clear view of the intersection. At night, in the pouring rain, nearly impossible. She chipped away at the edges of his story, creating small but noticeable cracks in his perfect facade. When she finally addressed the assault, she asked Officer, "In your initial field report, filed just 30 minutes after the arrest, you made no mention of an assault. Why?" "The initial report is a summary," Miller said defensively. "I added the full details in my supplemental report the next day, after consulting with my partner and my superiors." "After consulting," Sarah pressed. "Or after you realized the resisting and obstruction charges were weak, and you needed something more serious to stick." "Objection," Rourke shouted, leaping to his feet. "Counsel is speculating and impugning the officer's character," sustained Judge Thompson, a no-nonsense veteran of the bench, intoned. "Watch it, Ms. Jenkins." Sarah finished her cross-examination. She hadn't landed a killer blow, but she had sown seeds of doubt. Next came Sergeant Davis. His testimony was less dramatic than Miller's, but more impactful due to his age and experience. He corroborated every detail of Miller's story, his deep, tired voice giving the fabricated events an air of weary truth. He was the unshakable veteran backing up the hot-headed rookie. Sarah's cross-examination of Davis was brief. She knew he was a tougher nut to crack. She simply got him to confirm under oath that he saw the assault exactly as Miller had described it. He did so without hesitation. The prosecution rested its case. It looked bleak. The jury seemed convinced. Alan Rourke was practically beaming. Judge Thompson turned to the defense. "Miss Jenkins, do you wish to call any witnesses?" Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment. Her phone had buzzed in her pocket exactly 10 minutes prior. A text from an unknown number. "Proceed as instructed." "We are in position." "Yes, Your Honor." Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "The defense calls a surprise character witness." Rourke chuckled. "Objection. We weren't notified of any character witnesses." Given the circumstances that have only just come to my client's attention, we ask for the court's indulgence." "Your Honor," Sarah said, using the phrasing Marcus had given her. Judge Thompson looked intrigued. "I'll allow it, for now. Call your witness, Ms. Jenkins." Sarah took a deep breath. The defense calls Assistant United States Attorney David Hayes to the stand. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Alan Rourke's smile vanished. He shot a confused look at his team. Who was David Hayes? Why was a federal prosecutor being called as a character witness for a nobody? The main doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits entered. One was a sharp-looking Asian-American man, holding a briefcase, David Hayes. The other was a tall, imposing figure with graying temples and an air of absolute command. He was flanked by two other individuals who looked suspiciously like federal agents. They walked down the central aisle, their hard-soled shoes echoing in the silent room. Miller and Davis stared their faces draining of color. They recognized the second man. They had seen his picture in department-wide memos and news briefings. Every cop in the country knew who he was. David Hayes approached the witness stand. The second man, however, walked directly to the defense table and stood behind Marcus Thorne. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Mr. Hayes, please state your purpose here." "And can someone identify the gentleman standing behind the defendant?" David Hayes addressed the court, his voice crisp and clear. "My name is David Hayes, Assistant U.S., Attorney for the District of Maryland. I am not here as a character witness, Your Honor. I am here to inform the court that the prosecution in the state of Maryland versus Mark Thompson has been engaged in a criminal conspiracy to deprive a U.S. citizen of his civil rights." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Alan Rourke shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is outrageous. An ambush. I demand this man be held in contempt." The judge banged his gavel. "Order, Mr. Hayes, you are making an extremely serious allegation. On what grounds Hayes opened his briefcase? On the grounds of fabricated evidence, witness tampering and perjury, and on the grounds that the defendant, Mark Thompson, is not who he appears to be." All eyes swung to the man in the cheap suit at the defense table. He rose slowly to his full height. The man who had stood behind him now stepped forward. "Your Honor," David Hayes announced, his voice ringing with authority, "allow me to introduce my colleague, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Jonathan Price." Deputy A.G. Price nodded to the judge. "Your Honor, with your permission. The man you know as Mark Thompson is in fact Director Marcus Thorne, the sworn director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The gavel fell from Judge Thompson's hand, clattering onto his desk. A collective audible gasp swept the room. The court reporter's fingers froze over her stenotype machine. Alan Rourke staggered back as if he had been physically struck, his face a mask of pure horrified disbelief. And at the prosecutor's table, Officer Kevin Miller and Sergeant Frank Davis went bone white. They stared at the man they had mocked, shoved, and lied about the director of the FBI. The laughter had stopped, the trap had been sprung, and they had just realized that they were not the hunters. They were the prey. The silence that followed the Deputy Attorney General's revelation was a physical thing, a heavy, crushing weight that sucked the air from courtroom 4B. The gavel had literally fallen from Judge Thompson's hand. Reporters were frozen mid-scribble. The jury stared mouths agape, their understanding of the world tilting on its axis. Then, chaos erupted. "Order, order in this court!" Judge Thompson roared, his voice cracking as he fumbled for his gavel. He slammed it down, but the sound was lost in the cacophony of gasps and frantic whispers. Deputy Attorney General Jonathan Price's voice cut through the noise with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges against Director Thorne with prejudice." Motion. Motion granted, of course, the judge stammered, looking at the man in the ill-fitting suit with a mixture of awe and terror. Case dismissed, Director Thorne. You are free to go. But the proceedings were far from over. AUSA David Hayes stepped toward the prosecution's table, where Alan Rourke stood, as if flash-frozen his face, a ghastly shade of white. Officers Miller and Davis were rigid in their seats, their decorated uniforms suddenly feeling like cheap costumes. Alan Rourke, Kevin Miller, Frank Davis Hayes announced his voice, devoid of emotion. You are hereby notified that you are the subjects of a federal investigation. The charges include conspiracy to deprive a United States citizen of his civil rights under Title 18, Section 242, perjury and obstruction of justice. Federal agents will escort you for questioning shortly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rourke finally broke his paralysis, sputtering, "This is an outrage. A setup, you can't save it for your lawyer." Alan Deputy A.G. Price interjected, his voice like ice. "You were determined to make an example of a citizen. Congratulations. You have succeeded beyond your wildest dreams." At the prosecutor's table, Kevin Miller's bravado shattered into a million pieces. He looked physically ill, his breathing shallow. He turned a panicked, pleading gaze to his partner, but Sergeant Frank Davis was staring into nothingness. His face, a grey, stony mask of a man who saw the end of his entire world, arriving in a single, catastrophic moment. The precinct laughter, the mockery, the arrogant pride, it had all curdled into pure, unadulterated fear. They were no longer the hunters. They were the quarry, and the trap they had so gleefully set had just snapped shut on them. As federal agents quietly positioned themselves near the three men, Marcus Thorne rose. He turned not to his accusers but to his stunned public defender. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice the only calm instrument in the orchestra of chaos, "thank you for your diligent and principled defense. You are a credit to your profession. You're the director of the FBI." Sarah Jenkins whispered the reality of the situation, finally crashing down on her. Sometimes the only way to truly see the flaws in a structure is from the foundation, he replied softly, a profound sadness in his eyes. The fallout was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. The headline, "FBI Director Arrested in Baltimore Sting Exposes Corruption," became a national firestorm. For the three men at the center, the reckoning was swift and merciless. Alan Rourke's fall was the most spectacular. His mayoral ambitions vanished in an instant. The story of the city's top prosecutor personally championing a fraudulent case against the undercover head of the FBI made him a national laughingstock. His office was swarmed by federal investigators who, empowered by the high-profile nature of the case, uncovered a pattern of misconduct that went far beyond Marcus Thorne. Emails surfaced, showing a culture of withholding evidence to secure convictions. Facing federal indictment and impeachment, Rourke resigned in disgrace. He was disbarred, his name erased from the halls of power, and forever etched into the annals of legal hubris. Kevin Miller, the arrogant instigator, broke completely under federal questioning. Faced with irrefutable video evidence and the prospect of a decade in prison, he took a plea deal. In a packed courtroom, a pale, trembling Miller pleaded guilty to perjury, admitting he fabricated the assault charge because his authority felt challenged. His sentence was 18 months in federal prison, a lifetime of shame, and the permanent status of a convicted felon. Sergeant Frank Davis, the cynical veteran, chose a different path. Believing his 2 decades of service would shield him, he refused to cooperate and went to trial. It was a fatal miscalculation. With his own partner testifying against him, the jury took less than 3 hours to find him guilty of conspiracy. The judge, citing Davis's experience as an aggravating factor, sentenced him to 3 years. He lost his pension, his home, and the last vestiges of his honor. But Director Thorne's operation was never just about punishment. In the weeks that followed, he used the immense political capital he had earned to force a national conversation. Operation Clean Slate was revealed as a nationwide initiative, and the Baltimore case was the first tremor of an earthquake intended to shake the very foundations of American law enforcement. He testified before Congress not as a victim, but as an expert witness detailing the systemic rot he had experienced firsthand. For Sarah Jenkins, life was transformed. Hailed as a hero, she was inundated with offers from prestigious law firms. She refused them all. One evening her phone rang. It was Marcus Thorne. "Sarah," he said, "the formality gone. I'm forming a new task force within the Civil Rights Division at the DOJ. Its mission is to prosecute official misconduct. I need lawyers who have fought in the trenches, who believe in justice even when it's hard. I need you." She accepted on the spot, trading her thankless war in Baltimore for a chance to help lead the reform efforts in Washington, D.C. She was no longer fighting the system. She was helping to rebuild it. 6 months later, Marcus Thorne returned to Baltimore. He drove the same streets, not in a beat-up Camry, but in an unassuming government sedan. The changes were small but visible new community policing initiatives, officers walking the beat, a palpable sense of a department under intense scrutiny. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. He thought back to the laughter in the precinct, how confident they had been in their power, how certain they were of their impunity. They had failed to understand a fundamental truth, that justice, when it finally arrives, can be as patient and as methodical as the man they arrested, and as devastating as the reckoning that followed. Their world had ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, undeniable click of handcuffs on the wrists of those who believed they were untouchable. The story of Marcus Thorne isn't just about the spectacular fall of 3 corrupt officials. It's a powerful reminder that true justice requires accountability at every level. It shows how ego, prejudice, and a broken culture can turn protectors into persecutors. The karma that hit Officer Miller, Sergeant Davis, and D.A. Rourke wasn't magic. It was the direct result of one man's courage to test the very system he was sworn to lead. Their laughter in that precinct turned to ashes in their mouths because their power was built on a foundation of lies, and all it took was the light of truth to bring it all crashing down. If this story of justice and accountability resonated with you, please help us share it. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more true-life stories of drama twists and ultimate karma. What are your thoughts on this incredible sting operation? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.